ERP systems, they're basically the main system that underpins an organization's operational processes, running from buying stuff to making stuff to selling stuff to getting paid. They cover the whole spectrum of stuff you need to do to operate your business. SAP has historically been the biggest player in this market, and it still is. Others like Oracle are significant players, but not on the same scale as SAP. Now, we historically have focused on business process management. The market for implementing systems, implementing ERPs, implementing SAP is very highly populated. There's a lot of organizations in that space. I wouldn't say it's necessarily saturated because you can find niches within it, but there is already plenty of incumbents. What's interesting is we've always had a proposition around how you need to use process to do a true ERP transformation. When you change from one ERP system to another, you have to understand processes to be able to do that in the most optimal manner. Now, that's all well and good, and it's something we've been pushing for a long time. We did a project with Maersk Tankers a number of years ago, where we helped design a custom ERP system using processes. However, since SAP acquired Signavio, the market relevance of BPM in the context of ERP transformations has multiplied exponentially. Now, SAP are saying you need to do process as part of your ERP transformation. Let me explain the rationale for it a little bit, and then I'll start talking about how you begin to use process. But historically, SAP has a bit of a reputation for going over time and over budget. An SAP implementation is never easy. Very often you see these projects significantly overrun on both time and budget. Often a 7-figure overrun, even an 8-figure overrun, is not out of the realms of possibility. It's quite possible, quite probable even. So SAP had developed this reputation for being very complex, taking a long time to implement. SAP recognise this. They recognise that was going to be a challenge. So what we want to do is strip it back a little bit, and they want to make sure that when they implement SAP, it's done in a process-driven way, which should simplify it. Now, what does that mean? We'll have a look in a second at some slides. But the idea is they bought Signavio not to necessarily get revenue from Signavio. Well, that's nice to have. No, they bought Signavio so that they can basically accelerate the way that they do SAP implementations for the other clients of SAP. Now, Signavio's revenues may be 100 million, which to a total revenue of 20 billion is negligible. So Signavio is not there to generate masses revenue. It's there to be a tool that's an enabler. So I'll dive into exactly what the BPM-D looks like around system implementation. But before I do so, SAP, for transitioning, loads of people are on a system called ECC. It's an older system, and they're discontinuing it in 2027 and moving everyone onto the latest and greatest system, which is called S/4HANA. So in the next 4 years, there's going to be billions of pounds spent in consulting services, moving from ECC to S/4HANA. It's a very exciting and potentially very lucrative market, S/4HANA. And that is a 6-step methodology around doing some discovery as to which modules you want to implement and what it is that you want to change in your business. There's then some preparation, which is the piece where we're pretty heavily involved, where you're essentially understanding your current processes and current performance, creating baselines and assets you're going to use to support you further down. There's then an exploration phase where you're working out which of the new system-driven best practices you can adopt and which of your old legacy processes you want to bring over and create customizations for. There's then a development piece where you realize that, you begin to create those processes and you do testing of that. Then you come to the deployment phase where you're trying to roll out the new way of working, where you should be using Signavio and process to teach people how to do the processes in the new way. And then finally, there's an operation piece at the back end where you want to monitor and make sure that your new systems are working and working well. Now, that's all well and good. Consultancies have been doing SAP implementations for a very long time. And consultancies have done all different pieces of this. With Vasuni, for example, TCS, Tata Consulting Services, were implementing S/4HANA. And they'd followed this approach, except when they'd done this preparation piece, they'd done pretty crappy process models in Word. They didn't appropriately consider the organization's processes. They were just some poor quality Word documents that would not have been useful for training people on a new way of working. So it's Vasuni we were engaged to take the prepare work they'd done and create something that could actually be used for support and deployment. There's other opportunities where we want to get involved more early. That's the key piece. Why should people consider talking to us? Why is it important to talk to BPMD? Why is it important to consider process when you do an S/4HANA system implementation? At its core, this links back to what we previously talked about around S/4HANA implementations going over time and over budget. That's obviously not a desirable business outcome. Process can solve that. And how does it do that? Well, what you often find is that the landscape that organizations are moving away from, the old system, it's really highly customized. They've been using it for 10 years. Every time they have a new idea, a new way of working, they'll tweak the system. And not all of those are optimal system tweaks. Some of them are workarounds, some of them promote bad practices, and some are very useful. And what you find is there's two methodologies for when you're coming into doing a system implementation. You've got greenfield and brownfield. Greenfield is new. You're basically starting with the new system standard process as your baseline, whereas brownfield is you're bringing across all your old, dirty, customized ways of working. You might also hear the term bluefield sometimes, which is allegedly a hybrid of the two, but we don't really consider that a valid approach. We think that's really just a way of saying brownfield, but in a more palatable way. Organizations like the current systems generally, they don't like change. They don't like changing this cool little tweak they did 12 years ago that works nicely. So sometimes it's a bit of a battle. But what you've got to do is say you've got this amazing new system. You've got S/4HANA coming in, which is fantastic. It has a whole host of automations. It has AI enablement potential. It's got a load of add-ins, and it's really embracing a new digitally optimized way of working. So let's use that. Let's not bring over our old crap. Let's pick up all this good new stuff. Let's not bring over our old horrible ways of working. Let's not bring over our old comfortable but potentially inefficient ways of working. Instead, let's start with new system best practice. Let's start with the best that the market can provide, and then tactically allow customizations, strategically allow customizations in only those areas that are most important to us. Now, what does that mean? So if you do it by focusing on driving best practices, you're going to simplify your operations. You're going to align around what the best practice looks like, which is going to drive efficiency. It might even save headcount. It might deliver a more effective customer and an employee experience. The second thing is it makes implementation a hell of a lot simpler because you don't have hundreds of customizations that must be developed, tested, and then rolled out. Instead, you're using the stock standard with very limited number of customizations, reducing the implementation timeline and cost. And thirdly, because you're working off best practice, there's already some standard documentation for that. So it's much easier to document that and then drive adherence to the best practice way of working. If you go down the other route and you just copy everything you've got, you're basically just going to have a nice fancy back end for what is essentially a 12-year-old system. It's going to bring all your inefficiencies with you, the ones you knew about, the ones you didn't. But your system will go live. Just might take longer and cost more and give you a worse ultimate result. That's all well and good, saying we want to drive best practice, but that's not always practical. There are some areas where you're going to be looking to allow customization. There's some areas where it's important to do it your own way and not just go over the standard way. So how do you do that in a controlled way? Because if you just open it up and say to people, hey, we just want important customizations, everyone's going to submit all of their customizations and say this is really important. You have to have a top-down structure for how and where you allow those customizations. The concept that enables that is process segmentation. Now, what this means is you want to create a top-down view of all your processes, a process taxonomy. You want to work out for all of your processes, how uniform are they? So when you do them from time to time, are they always going to be the same? Is it always going to be the same process done in the same way? Or is it going to be adaptable? If you think about processing an invoice, it's going to be the same every time. You're going to do it in a rigorous, structured way. If you think about sales, that can be very different. It might be one time it's responding to a 300-page RFP, and another time it might be going for a beer with the client and getting a contract signed when they're nice and drunk. So there's different layers to how uniform a process can be. And you also need to consider how important is this process to our organization? How much does it differentiate us from the market? If I'm a domestic, if I'm a consumer goods manufacturer, I make blenders and ovens, people aren't going to care too much around what our HR policies are. That's not what's going to differentiate us. People don't care too much about how we manage our treasury operations. That doesn't differentiate us in the market. That's not what puts us ahead of our competitors. What puts us ahead of our competitors is product development, making sure we have the best products, and then production, making sure we're producing them to a very high quality, and maybe something around supply chain. Looking at differentiation, looking at uniformity, we begin to be able to bucket our processes into 4 different categories. First, we have central innovation. So these are ones that are very strategic processes that are very standard. They're going to be done the same way, but they are critical to the way our organization operates. So things like how you manage your portfolio of products and services, your pricing strategy. These are the areas where you're going to allow customization because they're going to differentiate you from the market, and they're going to be done regularly. So there's going to be good volume going through those customizations. So this is where you want to actually allow customization. And then you've got global services. So things like how you process invoices, how you manage procurement and purchase requisitions. They're not going to differentiate in the market, but they are going to be standard and uniform. So here, you're going to want to drive best practice, limit customizations. In parallel, you really want to be driving standardization here because you don't want to be allowing too much variation in how you do some of these key activities that are really global services. We've also got franchise variations. So they're not especially important in terms of differentiating you in the market, but they're going to be different every time you do it. Recruitment is very different country to country. I did a project with an oil and gas organization, and we were looking at recruitment. And the recruitment process in Denmark was very structured. They had job posting board, they had a pool of people they contacted, they had headhunters for senior positions. And then similarly, we looked at Angola, where to post a job, you couldn't put it online because the people who'd be applying didn't have an internet connection. Instead, you go down to the local job centre, print off the best looking leaflet and pin it up on the wall. So here's where you're allowing variation in the process, but it's not going to be system supported. It's going to use best practice, and then you can have out of system workarounds to manage that variation. And then finally, you have franchise innovation. So this is things like, if you think about McDonald's, you think about how they get burgers to the shops. Well, that's last mile supply chain. It's going to vary country to country. It's going to be getting your meat from, say, a local farm in England to your McDonald's, use a truck. Say you're in Russia, you're going to be using trains. Say you're in somewhere that's got a very low meat production, say you're in China, you're going to be importing beef from Australia more than likely. So it's going to be that variation. And these ones, there's not a ton of volume. It's going to vary franchise by franchise. So as part of your central implementation, you're not going to be creating masses of customizations, but you are going to be talking and understanding these variations, dictating what is acceptable and what isn't, allowing that out of system workaround, and not necessarily driving best practice. but not creating reams and reams of customizations for very low volume flow. This is more where you'd see optimizations and tweaks while the system is live. Ultimately, it helps you to focus on what differentiates you in the market, and it helps you to stop all the noise around your other processes. Basically, stop doing poor practices, stop doing inefficient mechanisms where you don't need to. You don't need 4 different ways of raising a procurement order. You need one best practice one that's enabled by the system. And ultimately, it saves you a ton of money. You spend a few £100,000 upfront to do segmentation, to properly control variation, and that saves you millions in development and potentially years. How you get there? Well, you need to define what your processes are. You need to set up some scoring dimensions so you can begin to put them into that little matrix. You need to talk to the business. You need to produce the outcome of a segmentation. Then, once you've done your segmentation, you're going to be defining your processes. So you're going to go 2 different routes. For those strategic ones, you'll go in a bit more detail. For the routine ones, you'll go in much less detail. So for the strategic ones, basically you're bringing in SAP best practice, and you're modeling your current processes as well. So you've got what you do today, what best practice looks like. You're identifying the differences and defining system customizations, and then creating your design document that you can hand to the system implementer, who will go and develop all those customizations. This is very standard. For your routine ones, this is a bit different. You're going to be capturing your best practice models, taking the SAP best practice. You're going to be picking up a pilot site and saying, here's best practice. Let's try using this. Is there anything that breaks? And then anything that breaks, you'll be creating a customization for. And then it goes into system implementation. So you're not doing the whole as is and gap analysis. Instead, you're going to be saying, here is what best practice looks like. Let's test this and see where it doesn't quite work. And this is a significant project. It can be several months, 6 or more months. And it does represent a fairly significant outlay, but this saves a client potentially millions. And this is a whole reason SAP bought Signavio. Now, that's the key messages here. Well, thank you all very much. I hope you have a lovely week.